Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos, tell me all the things.
Yes. Well, in the beginning of time, it was,
Mhm,
I mean, happy new week to you. I have started
mhm.
my week by missing a work meeting, then having someone miss my work meeting, then two other work meetings. This is so the highlight of my day. I mean, I can't even properly express how it's the highlight of my day.
Happy President's Day.
Ooh.
President of what? We don't know, but for all you presidents out there,
Mm.
happy day.
Happiest of days.
And happy listener corner. We have a couple different things to talk about today. The first is from Tejas Kudva via YouTube. And Tejas asked, when you're talking about games where you start at that same baseline and grow through play, isn't that any skill-based or point-buy based game? It's not my favorite, but a game such as Savage Worlds fits that description, since everyone starts with such a limited set of points, but advances take you in so many directions. I feel the original question is more talking like unlocking access to a flavorful upgrade path, like 5e's subclasses. Uh, so yes and no. When we were talking about this, we were talking about how D&D you choose several things when you start your character, and it makes you very different from any other character right from the start. So when I was talking about this in terms of a game system, I was talking about literally when you sit down to play, you are basically, except for maybe your name, are the same as every other character, or very much the same. And then as play progresses, you gain more and more things. And so that was my question anyway. Are there games like that out there? And I'm sure there are. I just don't have any in my limited experience with, other role-playing games to know what that might be.
Yeah, and it ends up becoming at some point it almost feels like a class, and the question is how do you get there, right?
Mhm.
And like Savage Worlds, for example, you may be very similar to another character because of the choices you make at your kind of after your character start. But you may, and so you may just simply say like, well, I'm faster, and I'm trained in the rifle in this particular way, so that's how I'm known. But
Mhm.
you start differentiating from the very beginning, right? And I think the question is, what's that gradient, right? At what point are you all kind of
Mhm.
level zero commoners, or are you in some
Right.
giant silo? And games like Savage Worlds, if you choose to be any kind of magical person, then you make certain choices. You turn that on as a sort of talent that you have, and now you're off to the races with these particular things that no one else has, which is a little different than saying like, I'm a teacher, you're a, I don't know, whatever else it is. You're a university student. We're playing this game together. We're essentially the same thing, but over time we're going to acquire different things and make different choices, right? I think it's hard to
Yeah.
pinpoint where that line is.
Exactly. And that's what one of the reasons we're doing this look at other role-playing games and comparing them to D&D is so that we can talk about these concepts about not just the game design of it, but the attractiveness of it to both new players and existing players and the different experiences that you might have with it.
Yeah.
And we will do that today. So thank you for that question. And the second comes from Shamaj22. It could be Shemage22 via YouTube, but we'll go from there. So has the Hasbro investor call indicates that they had an operating loss of 125 million for quarter four of 2022, and they thought it would be a good idea to spend how many more millions of dollars for a 30-second Super Bowl ad? Does this make sense to anyone else? Well, we're going to talk about that investor call in our news segment, but it possibly does make sense to me. It all depends. We can talk about the wisdom of business cases for spending loads of money on ads, but we really don't know for sure what the business and financial arrangement is between Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast and Paramount, the company that is actually producing and distributing the movie. Hasbro may not have spent a dime on that ad. We don't know.
Or half or
Now,
three quarters. We no idea,
right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, we have no idea. Now, putting ads out for a game is always one of those questionable things, because back when I was playing first edition, you could not buy that game in any local store. You had to go to a bookstore, you had to go to a specific store to find it, at least in my memory. So putting out an ad in the newspaper for a game that you would have to go search out somewhere didn't make a heck of a lot of sense. But now that we have games in Target, now that we have box sets in Walmart, now that there are places where people who don't know anything about the game may be wandering by, it would make more sense then to put ads in public spaces where brand recognition may be more likely to lead to sales. And we also have to remember, now we're talking about a movie and not a game. So that's a whole different thing. And the Super Bowl target audience is different than a regular football game audience, which is different from, right, a streaming sitcom audience, which is all those different things. So
Yeah.
that's a whole, it's a whole big question, but the answer is yes, it makes sense depending.
Yeah. And clearly, I mean, in a lot of ways, this is great news, right? Because this, you don't just say, one person doesn't say at Hasbro or at Paramount, oh, I'm going to create a Super Bowl ad, right?
Mhm.
That has to go through so many levels of discussion of what you're showing, why, what the demographic is, because it is an enormous spend. And
Mhm.
so that shows that there was belief that if you get this thing in front of people, they will come to it and that it's worth
Mhm.
showing to them, right? If this were that first D&D movie, I don't think we'd have a a trailer showing up on the Super
Yeah.
Bowl, because I don't think people would have believed it in it enough if they'd seen it. So in a lot of ways, this is a good indicator, right? And we'll have to see how it pans out. But hopefully this is a very good sign, and it's a very smart move, because it's going to mean a ton of people seeing the movie and a ton of people recognizing D&D's relevance and being interested in seeking it out, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and it all comes back to that monetization, right? If Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro want to turn D&D into a billion-dollar brand, there are limited number of avenues to do that. One of them is a big blockbuster movie that makes $1 billion, all on its own.
Yeah.
And so it would be interesting to know what the relationship is between Paramount and Hasbro in this, and what the split is on, worldwide ticket sales, on all the different residuals and,
Yeah,
you know, uh,
merchandise, all of that, right?
merchandising, all that. And so in that case, ads may be very important to reach that goal if that's the hope. So
Yeah,
it's a very
well,
good question,
yeah.
and we could probably discuss it for the whole show, but we're not. We're going to move into our news and commentary section and talk about the new D&D movie trailer that just dropped from IGN FanFest. The link is in the show notes. You probably have seen it by now, since the show drops a couple days after we record. But it's a minute and a half trailer, and the gist of it is the infamous "Raise Dead" questioning stuff.
Speak with Dead.
Sorry, speak with Dead. Right, you speak with Dead, and it plays out the parties trying to get information out of a corpse using the speak with Dead spell, and it goes pretty much exactly. If you have a group that is into humor in any way, you have played this before. So if you watch this, and whether you're an experienced player or a new player or even a non D&D player, if you can't appreciate that little bit that they did in that trailer, then I don't want you in my game, because my group literally 3 days ago was having a discussion about this exact topic, and it played out almost precisely as you saw in the
Yeah.
trailer in our group.
That's why I love Speak with Dead, because it inevitably, you start with like, okay, what do we ask? And oh God, everybody's all over the place, right? Then finally you come up with like,
Mhm.
well, let's start with these two questions. You ask the first one, and the answer probably throws off what the next one should be. And then you're sitting there asking, and at some point it's really easy for someone to ask a bad question. And then it just
Yeah,
goes off to the races, right? It just derails
right.
completely. And this is such a perfect capture of that, which shows that either the folks doing it understood D&D, or they brought in
Mhm.
people who do, right? And that's a great
Yep.
indicator. I think Michelle Rodriguez recently shared that she had played before the movie. And so there's an understanding that was there,
Yeah.
hopefully not just at the actor level and director level, writer level, but that's great, right? The
Yeah.
script clearly knew that this is the kind of thing that's going to resonate with the audience and how to communicate that effectively. And the scene is great, right? It's really, really
Yeah.
good looking undead that's popping up and
Yeah.
with this great voice. It's an excellent scene.
Yeah. It is. When other movies or shows come out and people know I'm into D&D, come up to me and they say, "Is that what D&D is like?" And sometimes I'll have to say yes, sometimes I'll have to say no. With this one, I'll have to say, yeah, this is literally my group and it's glorious. So check that out. Let us know what you think. But for me, it's two big thumbs up.
Hmm. Yeah.
Now to get to that earnings call that we have discussed already. Hasbro reported in this earnings call to investors that the direct business comprised of Magic, D&D Beyond, Hasbro Pulse, and Magic Secret Lair was up 15% in 2022, which is no surprise to me. And we have to remember, of course, that this is an investor call. So all of the business and investory type things that you're going to hear, you can expect and have to take it with the grain of salt that it requires. What did you see from this earnings call, Teos, that caught your attention?
Yeah, and in our show notes, we didn't focus on what we talked about. I forget it was last week or the one before that, but recently there was as was mentioned in our question, the headline is really Hasbro losing a ton of money, but the
Mhm.
parts here focus on which parts did well, right? So D&D Beyond has grown in its number of users 20% since it was acquired in May. And some of this may be a little bit, dressed up to make it seem positive and quiet any unrest that might be, shareholders who've heard about this problem with the OGL and D&D Beyond cancellations and things like that. But overall, it seems, at least the story that they're telling, and it's probably true, is that overall, really strong growth that puts that behind them, and especially if they can gain users back, then it puts that behind them. Overall, they said growth for Wizards of the Coast in digital gaming was 5%, outperforming the games market overall, which was
Mhm.
largely flat to down. Sort of, in a tough time, we did well. And then,
Mhm.
this other part of us, Magic, D&D Beyond, Hasbro Pulse, et cetera, 15% up. So, they're trying to highlight these positives. What's supremely interesting to me, and they also say tabletop revenues were up 12% behind Magic, digital declined 23%. So you can just see how confusing these numbers are of what
Mhm.
part of it is up or down. And one of the things that for yet another quarter we didn't hear was just D&D isolated on itself.
Mhm.
And that can only mean that it's not a huge number, right? Because they're
Right.
not going to forgive if they could say D&D, itself is up blah. They would have loved to
Mhm.
have said that, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, that is not said here.
Mhm.
Everything else is including some other portion. It's either how D&D Beyond
Right.
grew or how Magic grew. It's not clear that what D&D itself is doing. I find that fascinating.
Yeah. And to get anyone to admit problems during an investor call is a big thing. And Chris Cox did say that they were too aggressive um, in terms of their open gaming license,
Yeah.
and also too aggressive in their 30th anniversary edition for Magic. But yeah,
I mean,
we're going to
$1,000
focus
for
on the
six
open.
cards or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, but they talked about the open gaming license and saying that we misfired on updating our open gaming license, a key vehicle for creators to share or commercialize their D&D inspired content. Our best practice is to work collaboratively with our community, gather feedback, and build experiences that inspire players and creators alike. It's how we make our games among the best in the industry. We have since course corrected and are delivering a strong outcome for the community in game. Uh, so, that's it's all well and good. It it's the nice spin on saying, "Boy, did we make a mistake." Hopefully, we're in the
Survival dilemma.
process of correcting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about these,
Anything.
we make fun of. There was another kind of tweet I think that highlighted some bit of investment speaking. Like it is important to realize this is investment speak. They are
Mhm.
speaking to folks who want to hear about the axiomatization of the fundamentalists,
Yeah.
diagonal growth, fundamentally, it's just it's
Yeah,
all full of a different language, just the same way that we would not explain to a new player things in the level of language that we could use with a friend who's been playing an RPG for 40 years, right? It is like a
right.
language. And so you have to give a little bit of a pass on some of this stuff and how this plays out, right? It is a community, it is an approach. And so they're just going to say that. But in the end, what they're saying is, what you can translate to is they had to acknowledge the mess up. That's a big deal. It's a thing they don't want to do.
Hmm.
They're overall saying that it's survivable and that they're on a path to being in a good place. The D&D Beyond has basically made an earnings per share contribution, and then in the end, it's positive, right? And the
Hmm.
revenue growth has been commensurate with user growth. So adding more users to D&D Beyond is creating more revenue. So that's all positive for the acquisition. It's positive for where they're headed, based on the idea that they are working with the community to improve things, which they are. So hopefully that's all positive for everyone. And we don't get a little too caught up in the business speak of it, which
Hmm.
is just what's going to happen at these types of things.
For sure. For sure. So speaking of monetization, Tim Harford, friend of the show, has put a new article up in the Financial Times where he's a columnist and talks about the challenge that role-playing games face with monetization. So Tim was on our show recently to talk about his podcast, Cautionary Tales and the Satanic Panic. This article in the Financial Times is all about Hasbro, the open gaming license a bit, and the RPG industry in general. And do you wanna take this on, Teos?
Yeah, I mean, it's neat. He goes back to when he was a kid and he buys Dragon Warriors, his favorite game, for £10, right? Because he's in England in the 1980s. And he says, it was a cheap price then. But he thinks about the countless fun he's derived, the countless value, because since he's an economist, right, that has been provided by this
Mhm,
game to himself for this tiny price paid up front. And, it really is, it's a steal. And what do you do with that? And he compares it to football, right? Or any sport where, really, like, you can't charge people millions of dollars for playing football. So how do you make millions off of football? And we see that actually football is hugely profitable. It's not by selling footballs and it's not by
mhm.
charging you to play, but it's things like tickets to see famous people play. It's branded t-shirts, right? That not only do you buy the t-shirt once, but you keep buying the branded t-shirt over and over again, right? It's
Right.
certainly true of me. I have a lot of t-shirts of my team. I'm wearing one under here now.
Mhm.
TV subscriptions, bets, all kinds of ways that things are monetized. And so he says, Hasbro does a better job of squeezing money out of gamers, but it faces the same challenge. You can download the rules free of charge or pay about $25 for a starter set. For less than 200, you can own the core publications, right? And then you never need to pay anything else. And that's the challenge that the RP industry faces. And it's the core problem behind all of this. And I thought that was a really, really smart take on it.
Yeah. I think the important thing that I took away from this, it wasn't stated, but I think that we need to remember as gamers, people who hopefully love the game and want to keep playing the game and make new friends and play with new people, is that, we hear monetization and it's always in a negative way,
Hmm.
right? People take it in a negative way, but without that monetization, there's stagnation. And the big fear, in the 90s and the 2000s, even in the 10s, was that the game was dying, that the gaming population was getting older and would be dying out, and there would be no new players and no one to play with. And if there's no new players and no one to play with, there's no new products, there's no new additions, there's no adding vibrancy to the game. So, when we hear monetization, there's a natural reaction to think of it in a negative way, but it's there is a positivity to it that we tend to overlook, but we shouldn't.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you want the people who are working on your favorite game to have a job and and a good job,
Mm,
right? And we've seen years with many layoffs, and it hasn't been, widely advertised. It's been discussed that layoffs were on the table, but a round of layoffs just went through Hasbro and Wizards,
mhm,
and the D&D team was essentially untouched. No
mhm,
big name designers are gone, no medium name or small name designers are gone. everybody kept their job, and that's what happens when the game is doing well. And it's what we as
Mhm.
fans should also want, right? So the monetization thing, I agree with you 100%. We have to sort of take it in context and think, we do want people to have jobs. We don't want just Wizards to have jobs. We want the folks at Wizards to maintain those jobs and keep the D&D team hopefully growing and strong and yeah, doing well.
Yep. Joe Mangianello is developing a D&D TV show? Question mark. Comicbook.com is reporting that actor and D&D fan Joe Mangianello discusses the previously reported documentary involvement, but also says that I work for Dungeons and Dragons and quote, I'm developing a TV show for them. So that's above and beyond the other show that we've been reporting on, I believe.
We think
So
so, right? So it'll be really
yeah.
interesting to see what this is. He has a stated love of Dragonlance and has at times dropped hints about working on a script for Dragonlance. So who knows what this is? Is it a partnership? Is it something where directly Wizards is doing this? It's hard to say. The video is it's by a company that's has made his gaming table, and it's worth checking
Mhm.
out this video because it's unbelievable. The new gaming room. If you thought his old gaming room was cool, which it was, now he's got this special custom table he's setting up, and I mean it is quite the thing to look at. But then also he drops these little bits about what he's been involved in the past and what he's doing now, and so that's where this comes from. And comicbook.com had the story, so we have a link to that as well.
And in a little bit of sadder news, Wizards of the Coast has fired the last remnants of their Latin American localization team. Speaking of monetization and
Hmm.
needing it to continue, they have been talking more. Wizards has been talking more about expanding its reach into other parts of the world other than the United States, and they've been promoting their reach into Latin America for Magic, but also for D&D. And in 2022, most of the team was fired to cut costs, with the Brazilian team remaining. But this week that ended as well.
Yeah, it's a real shame because we've seen how some areas, like Japan, seems to really have some great localization efforts that have really recently happened by giving more power to that team, to more autonomy, where they can run their events their way and create giveaways and things to attract to the Japanese audience in ways that speak to the Japanese audience directly, right? Versus sort of being handled on the high. And so getting rid of this team, which has happened, slowly over time, but means that you're back to having a central office try to devise what the plan is for Latin America. And I just don't think that's going to see much success. It hasn't seen much success in the past. So I don't know what this will mean, but it is very sad for those of us who want to see that growth in the region. Um, it leaves us with no answers to how Wizards is going to properly achieve growth there. I don't know if they will.
Yeah, when you interviewed Kyle Brink, it's funny that you brought up that increasing your support for localization, your support for gamers around the world, and unfortunately that happened not long afterward. So,
Hmm.
but hopefully, maybe this is like one step, and the next step in the process is to reestablish localization somewhere. I we can only hope that
Yeah,
it remains on their radar.
it needs a plan badly, and the
Yes.
problem is it's not an easy plan to formulate. Um, but I hope someone really comes up with a great plan because if you can get, and it's not just Latin America, right? It's places like India, places like China. If you can get a good plan deployed there, the growth possibility incredible, right?
Yep. What's better than the SRD, Teos?
I don't know. Tell me, please.
The SRD in comma separated value format, apparently.
That is
Random
tasty.
Wizard on Mastodon announced that he put the contents of the 5e SRD into a comma separated value file. You can follow the link in our show notes to download the file and import them into Excel or any other database that reads a CSV file. Very useful if you're building, you know, your own character builder, your own dungeon creation tools, whatever. You can find it there.
Yeah, it was. I already did it, and I looked it up the other day because I was like, "Wait, what are the gaps at high CRs where there are no monsters?" Oh yeah, these right here. And it's just really easy. You
Yep.
just sort it on CR, and there you go.
Okay, awesome. And last but not least, I wanted to give one more shout out to our Grim Hollow Valikan Clans Kickstarter. It is continuing and it will run through the 18th of March. There are some good stretch goals that have already been unlocked, and there will be more. We did a video, James Hake, Ben Byrne, and I, on everything that's in this. It was a 90-minute stream that's also available on Twitch at twitch.tv, ghostfire_official. So you can find it there.
Fantastic. I'm back. I backed it already. I'm excited for it.
Thank you, Teos. We appreciate it.